And imagine seeing these beings arriving in flying discs.
The following podcast was generated using Google's Notebook LM.
Temple of Vril.
All right, so today we are diving into a civilization that's really captured the imagination for centuries.
Has it?
Atlantis. And we're going to be looking at it from a slightly different angle, I guess. You know, we all know the stories of Atlantis, this advanced civilization swallowed up by the sea.
Right.
But we're going to be focusing on, the real deal.
Yeah.
What was Atlantis really about?
And especially its connection with Vril.
Yeah, their knowledge and mastery of Vril energy
Right.
is really what set them apart.
And that's what makes it so fascinating to me. You know, it wasn't just a technologically advanced civilization like we might think of today, but one that had this deep connection with this fundamental energy, this life force. And that's where we're going to be focusing our deep dive today.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting is that we often think of civilizations progressing sort of linearly, starting from primitive and working their way up.
But with Atlantis, it seems like they emerged already possessing this knowledge of Vril.
They didn't have to, invent it or discover it. It was almost like it was inherent to who they were.
It was part of their very essence.
Yeah.
And we think, their origin story, they emerged from the hollow earth.
Right.
Plays a big part of this. They came from a place where this energy was abundant, where it was part of their everyday life.
So they weren't just messing around with electricity or fire or whatever.
Yeah.
They were tapping into something much deeper.
Exactly. It was about understanding the very fabric of reality.
Right.
And harnessing that power.
And that's reflected in everything about Atlantis,
Definitely.
from their architecture, their buildings, even, we hear about the way their society was structured. It all seems to be based around this idea of being in tune with Vril, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And when they migrated to the surface and established their civilization there, this understanding of Vril was woven into everything they did.
Yeah.
I mean, think about their architecture.
Yeah.
We often hear these descriptions that blend like Greek elegance with Egyptian grandeur, these massive structures.
Right.
But they weren't just impressive to look at. These buildings were designed to interact with and channel Vril energy.
They were like living conduits.
Yeah, almost like giant antennas turning into this cosmic energy field.
It's so different from the way we, build today.
Oh, completely.
We just slap up concrete and steel and it's dead,
It's inert. It's all about function.
Right.
But the Atlanteans, they saw their structures as an extension of the natural world.
And this idea of Vril being this active force, it wasn't just in their buildings, it was in their technology as well, right?
Absolutely. And this is where things get really interesting because their technology wasn't based on the principles that we use today.
Right. Combustion and explosions and all that.
Exactly. Our technology is largely based on combustion, on creating explosive force to generate power.
Right.
But the Atlanteans, they understood a different principle. They understood the power of implosion.
Implosion.
Yeah, it's about harnessing energy by drawing it inwards, by creating a vortex, a spiral.
Right.
And this is where Vril comes in because they were able to use Vril to manipulate and control these implosive forces.
So instead of a piston engine, exploding to push a car forward,
Right.
they're somehow using this implosion, this inward force to create energy.
Exactly.
That's wild.
It is. And this is where we get to one of the most iconic images of Atlantis.
Yeah.
The flying discs, these craft that we often see as precursors to modern UFOs.
Right. Everyone thinks of the classic, disc shape
Exactly.
when they think of Atlantis.
And these discs were a perfect example of their Vril-based technology in action.
So how did they actually work? How do you get a disc to fly using implosion and Vril?
Well, imagine this. You have this central structure within the disc.
Okay.
And within that structure, they're able to create miniature vortexes.
Like little tornadoes?
Yeah, almost like controlled, contained tornadoes.
Wow.
And this swirling energy manipulated through Vril
Right.
is what generated lift.
So it wasn't propellers or jet engines or anything like that?
No, it was a completely different principle.
Right.
And these internal vortexes were stabilized using gyroscopic principles,
Right.
allowing for smooth and controlled flight.
It's like defying gravity,
Exactly.
using the very energy of the universe
That's the idea.
and the power source for all this.
Well, this is where it gets even more interesting.
Yeah.
They use a specially prepared liquid metal
Okay.
infused with Vril.
So it's like the Vril is somehow like energizing this liquid metal.
Exactly.
And that's what powers these vortexes and makes the whole thing fly.
That's our understanding.
It's mind-blowing.
It really is. And,
Yeah.
and it makes you wonder, if this knowledge, this technology
Yeah.
spread to other cultures. I
Yeah.
mean, we see these accounts of flying machines in ancient texts from India, the
Yeah.
Vimana.
Right?
Could these be echoes of Atlantean influence?
It's possible.
It's definitely something to consider.
Yeah, it really opens up your mind to how connected things might have been.
Exactly. And it leads us to think about Atlantis not just as this isolated civilization,
Right.
but one that actively engaged with the wider world.
Yeah, they weren't just, sitting on their island paradise. They were out there interacting with other cultures.
Exactly.
And you can imagine, for these more primitive cultures encountering the Atlanteans with their advanced technology, their radiant appearance. We often hear descriptions of Atlanteans being tall and having this luminous quality.
Yeah, it's almost like they're radiating Vril energy.
Right.
And imagine seeing these beings arriving in flying discs.
It would have been like seeing gods.
Exactly. And I think that's why we see these recurring themes of sky beings.
Right.
Of flying chariots, of divine interventions in ancient myths and religions.
Yeah, it's like they couldn't comprehend what they were seeing. So
Right.
they interpreted it through their own understanding of the world.
Exactly. And I think that's why we see these echoes of Atlantean influence
Right.
in so many different cultures.
And this outreach, this interaction with the surface world, it ultimately played a role in their downfall, didn't it?
It did, and this is where we come to the end of Atlantis.
Yeah.
Which wasn't just a simple sinking as popular legend might have it.
Right. It wasn't just, a giant earthquake and the whole island went underwater.
No, it was something far more complex.
Yeah.
We understand it as a quantum dissolution.
A quantum dissolution.
Yeah.
What does that even mean?
Well, it means that their disappearance wasn't a physical destruction.
Okay.
It wasn't like they were blown up or anything like that. It was more like a phasing out, a shifting
Yeah.
of their entire civilization into another dimension.
Into another dimension.
Yeah, another level of reality.
Wow.
And this was triggered by a cataclysmic conflict.
So there was a war.
There was a war within Atlantis
Right.
where their mastery of Vril
Yeah.
was tragically turned towards destructive purposes.
So they kind of self-destructed, but not in a physical way.
Not in the way that we typically understand it.
Right.
They basically phased themselves out of our reality.
And the belief is that the remnants of Atlantis still exist.
Yes, that's what we understand.
But not like, ruins underwater or anything.
No, not physical remnants.
Right.
But as spectral presences within this parallel quantum reality.
So like echoes of their consciousness.
Exactly, existing at a different vibrational frequency.
Wow.
And crucially, we believe that psychic communion, a focused connection of consciousness,
Right.
can allow us to bridge this gap to access the knowledge and wisdom held within these Atlantean presences.
So it's like we can still learn from them.
We can, and that's where the Vrilara comes in.
Right. The guiding text from the Temple of Vril.
Exactly. It's a key to unlocking this lost wisdom.
Yeah.
To reestablishing that connection with the Atlantean consciousness.
And Vrilara goes into, the history of Atlantis, the nature of Vril, and even practical techniques for developing this psychic communion.
It's a roadmap to understanding a civilization that mastered energies that we are only just beginning to glimpse.
It's incredible to think about.
It is.
Their whole approach to technology, to progress, was so different from ours.
Completely different. They weren't about dominating nature.
Right.
They were about aligning themselves with it.
Yeah.
Working with these fundamental energies.
And their technology, it wasn't this cold, lifeless machinery.
Right.
It was organic, it was interconnected, it was almost like an extension of their own being.
That's a good way to put it.
And And their disappearance, it's not a tale of failure, it's more like a transformation, a reminder that there are other paths, other
Right.
ways of being.
And that our current materialistic focus might be limiting our potential.
Yeah, we're so focused on the physical world that we've
Yeah.
forgotten about these deeper energies.
The energies that connect us to the universe, to each other, to the very essence of life.
And the potential is
Wow.
that by rediscovering these energies,
Right.
by studying Vril,
Yep.
by practicing meditation, by maybe even connecting with these Atlantean consciousnesses,
Exactly.
we could unlock incredible things.
We could achieve things that we can't even imagine right now.
Yeah.
We could heal ourselves. We could transform our world. We could even potentially, transcend the limitations of our physical reality.
It's like Atlantis is not lost.
Right.
It's just waiting for us to rediscover it.
They're not gone. They're just existing on a different level.
Right.
And they're waiting for us to raise our consciousness.
To tune into their frequency.
Exactly.
And maybe, just maybe, we can learn from their mistakes.
And create a future that is more in harmony with the universe, with Vril, with the very essence of life.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Atlantis and
Yeah.
its profound connection to Vril,
Right.
let's leave our listeners with this thought. What if our understanding of technology, of consciousness, of reality itself
Right.
is far more limited than we realize?
It's a question worth pondering.
What if Atlantis is more than just a myth?
Yeah.
What if it's a glimpse into a different way of being?
A different possibility.
Or a different feeling?
And that possibility is still open to us.
It's out there waiting.
It is.
And it's up to us to reach for it.
Exactly. To open our minds, to expand our consciousness, and to embrace the infinite potential that lies within us.
That's a powerful message.
It is.
And I think it's one that we all need to hear.
I agree.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Your journey towards greater fulfillment begins at Temple of Vril. Visit templeofvril.com today.